Let us perhaps start by understanding what education is and telling ourselves what is the purpose of education. You remember in many African countries when there was the struggle for independence, one of the enemies that was identified to be fought was ignorance. And on the basis of that, education was given its pride of place. And the kind of education that we inherited from the colonizers was education that was designed to support the colonial state. Not much changed in many African countries. And the net effect is that the curricula that was developed in many African countries still mirrored the curricula in the colonizing countries. So that if a country had been colonized by the French, it was fundamentally a French curricula because people were then meant to pursue further studies in France. The same with British colonies, the same with the Portuguese. In British colonies for a long time, even the high school education and examination was still set by University of Cambridge. And many institutions were affiliated to European universities in that sense. But the specific question that you have asked is, what is civic education? Civic education may be described rather than defined as the deliberate effort to expose the population to critical issues of governance and how they are to relate with the system that governs them. Because it is assumed that when people are aware of how they are to be governed, when they are aware of the do's and the don'ts, then they'll become good citizens. To use this Greek analogy where they say that in every society there are three types of people. There are idiots, people who just don't care about what happens in their society. Then there are tribalists, people whose worldview is defined by their ethnic origin. Then there are citizens. And citizens are those who are involved in the affairs of their nation and they want to ensure that their nation is governed in a proper way. Civic education is therefore the means via which people's thoughts and attitudes are refined so that they become good citizens, and they become citizens who ask governments to account, governments to deliver on all the promises that they make for the good of generations who live now and generations yet to be born. The word ideal sometimes is used in order to think of a society that is perfect, but the reality is that there is no such perfect society. And there is not a single model of civic education. Societies vary. If you go throughout the world, you'll find that there are societies which place great premium on what they call patriotism. And people are drilled to be patriotic, to think about what is in the best interest of the nation. You see that in countries such as China, countries such as Russia, countries such as Japan, countries such as Korea, where deliberate effort is made to, in the words of some, to indoctrinate people to think in a particular way for the good of the nation. And I'm using the word indoctrinate simply as a term of art because it simply says that people are then made aware and the scales are removed from their eyes so that they think of the best interest of the nation. If you go to the Scandinavian countries, there is another method of indoctrination where they are told that you are the people who are going to serve our country, our resources are going to be used in that regard. In African countries, in the early days, immediately after independence, because African countries found themselves in a very difficult situation. Many of them still carried the burden of the former colonizer and still do so. And then there was the period when there was the conflict between what was described as capitalism and communism and socialism. And people are grappling with different ways of dealing with this idea of creating the perfect citizen. If you went to Tanzania, individuals such as Julius Kambarage Nyerere came up with the clarion call for Ujamaa, self-reliance. In Ghana, there was the clarion call by Kwame Nkrumah. In places like Guinea-Bissau, individuals such as Amilcar Cabral. So that when we talk about civic education, it was the duty of the government to ensure that the people are exposed to this kind of information. And if you visited many schools in different parts of Africa, for example, you would find one of the subjects that were offered was history and civics. The idea that history is critical to the proper understanding of your origin, and civic awareness is also critical to your appreciation of how government functions and how government is then beholden to their people for purposes of service delivery. So in a nutshell, one would say that it's the duty of the state to educate our people, because when you are running a government where the people are ignorant, it is a lot more difficult to do so. But some say that it's easier, that in fact it is more difficult to run a government where people have knowledge and people are aware. But the question is, what kind of knowledge are we talking about? Is it the kind of knowledge or information that builds, or the kind of information and knowledge that is used to destroy? That depends on the culture that has been inculcated in the people and how those in positions of leadership and responsibility exercise power for the general good. You know, social media is a medium that lends itself to different uses. There is a lot of information in social media. Some of it is negative, some of it is positive. We have this phenomenon of fake news. People just sit somewhere and generate news which they know is fake. You know, the civic space and the social media space, they say somebody is dead and they are alive. They say things that are totally untrue. So it is something that is a double-edged sword. That it is information that in many ways is uncensored, and some people consume the information in a very gullible manner, and they act on the basis of that information. And that is why in quite a number of countries, that space is restricted. If you go to countries such as Eritrea, the information that is available in that particular medium is restricted. We have seen in the recent past in quite a number of countries when the society is boiling up or when they are riots, the very first thing that the governments do is to shut down social media in order to deny the people the opportunity to use and manipulate it in a negative way. But it's true to say that social media has in many ways now killed your so-called traditional media, because information is available almost instantaneously, and that information is shared in its raw form and sometimes consumed in its raw form, and on the basis of that raw information, people then act unquestioningly. It is something that is not easy to control, and its impact in societies such as are found in Africa and Asia and indeed in any part of the world is something that we have yet to realize in its full splendor. And many countries are now beginning to realize that this is perhaps a monster which can consume an entire society, because it allows for sharing of information, it allows for mobilization in a manner that was never anticipated by those who were running governments or running institutions. And the experience that we have seen in Kenya in the month of July, where young people have been able to mobilize themselves using that medium, has sent a clear message. We have seen its impact, where a number of individuals in different countries, we have seen young people in Uganda trying to emulate that. We have seen young people in Nigeria trying to emulate that, young people in different parts of the world trying to emulate that. And we even saw it in the early days during the Arab Spring, when the social media space was not in use in the manner that it is now, but it also enabled young people to mobilize themselves in Tunisia, to mobilize themselves in Tahrir Square in Cairo, to mobilize in Libya. This is a space that lends itself to use and misuse in a manner that is without precedent. You know, when we talk about civic education and education generally, we must ask ourselves, what are we teaching our young men and women? In 1933, an African American called Carter G. Woodson wrote a book titled Miseducation of the Negro. And his thesis in that book was that the Negro had been miseducated because the kind of education that you are exposed to was designed to make you run away from yourself, to make you hate yourself, to make you hate everything about your history, to make you hate everything about your culture. And his prescription was that if you want to change society positively, it is important that you look at the curriculum and you revamp the curriculum. And in order to do so, a nation must ask itself, what do we want? Why do we exist? If we are Kenyans, if we are Ugandans, if we are Tanzanians or Ghanaians or Africans or Asians, in that broad sense, we must first ask the question, what do we want for this generation and generations yet to be born? And you then tailor your curriculum in a manner that is designed to achieve the end that you desire. But if you cannot define what you want at the end of your journey, then it means you can consume everything. I see, for example, in many African countries, when you travel, you find something British curriculum, American curriculum. And those in the middle class actually think it is a badge of honor for their children to pursue American curriculum, to pursue British curriculum, so that the level of indoctrination, the level of belief that something foreign is better than your own, is what defines how people behave in quite a number of African countries specifically. So to change this, it is the duty of the state to define what is in the best interest of the country. Has it not been obvious that when you look at a number of European countries, even the little ones, like Denmark, like Norway, like Sweden, wherever they go, they have a Swedish school for their small Swedish population, a Danish school. The French have a French school. The German have a German school. The British have a British school. The Americans have their own. The Italians have their own, because they believe that their education system will create citizens who are aligned to their vision. But in many other countries, we don't define that. In fact, particularly in the continent of Africa, we want to borrow and drink from the wells of other civilization. So you produce individuals who are intellectually confused and intellectually captured, and they are not good citizens of their countries. They are, as one would say, essentially individuals who are mentally captured, individuals whose minds are colonized. And that is why education or miseducation then becomes the right term to define such individuals. And going forward, you look at a number of countries which have resisted what one may describe as Western domination in terms of thinking. They have tried to define themselves. Look at the Russians. They have an education system that is designed to make a good Russian. Look at the Chinese. They have an education system that is designed to make a good Chinese. Look at the Japanese. They have an education system that is designed to make a good Japanese. Look at the Koreans. They have an education system that is designed to make a good South Korean. And that Indians are also doing the same thing, sending a clear message that nations succeed or fail on the basis of the type of education that they embrace. And I'm using the word education broadly because in my view, civic education is a subset of broader education. And no country will realize our potential until and unless our education system is attuned to her defined needs and aspirations. It must start early. When you want to bend fish, you bend it while it is still wet. That is when you can change it. And education must start very early when people are young in what is called kindergarten. That is when you begin to tell people what is important. You begin to tell them about their history. You begin to tell them about their culture. You begin to tell them about the things that they know so that as they grow up in an environment where they are clear, about the direction that they ought to take, and where they are clear about what they are designed to achieve, where there is clarity about the goal that is desired. And that is why Africa finds herself in a particularly dangerous space, because having been divided into different little countries, then it becomes a lot more difficult to have a common approach on matters of education. Africa, for example, today is divided into 54 odd countries, which somehow still describe themselves as Anglophone. They say we are English speaking. Others define themselves as Francophone, French speaking. Others define themselves as Lusophone, Portuguese speaking. And with the Chinese now coming with the Confucius centers, some are beginning to define themselves as Sinophone. One would have desired an approach where African countries have a dominant language, a lingua franca, which is connecting the continent. And if you look at the African scene from 1963, there has always been that desire, which has lately culminated in Africa Agenda 2063, which is founded on 7 pillars, which says that one of the areas that is going to be the focus of Africa is a prosperous, united Africa that has a culture that is dominant, which is given its pride of place, an Africa that therefore plays a critical role in the world, where women and youth are involved, where research and development is given its pride of place. That is the direction that the continent must take in order to give practical meaning to the thing that we call Pan-Africanism. Otherwise, Pan-Africanism will simply remain at the level of slogans and at the level of romanticism and at the level of philosophy and at the level of intellectualization. But people want a practical thing that informs people's daily lives in a manner that is measurable and in a manner that changes people's lives. And education is the game changer. The mind is the standard of the man, and by extension, of course, the woman. Education, as we say many times, is the game changer, because the mind is the standard of a person. And civic education is therefore the mother's milk, if you may, that feeds people's action. And the strategies that are to be deployed is that deliberate effort must be made very early on, in the early days of young people in kindergarten through to primary, through to secondary, and through to tertiary education, to talk about the critical things of their nation, to make them aware of what it is that a good citizen must do. And this must take different forms and must not be set in stone. Of course, there are certain fundamentals. So once you expose people to these things that are critical to the life of a nation, and you revamp your curriculum in a manner that is designed to achieve the declared goals and aspirations of the nation, then you will discover that the default position of many people is to do the right thing. We'll be able to say, this is what defines a Kenyan, this is what defines a Tanzanian, this is what defines a Ghanaian. And if you want to eliminate those boundaries, you'll say, this is what defines an African. Because there are things when we relate to other people, you can simply say, this is what defines a Japanese. This is what defines a Swede. This is what defines a Dane. This is what defines an American. This is what defines an Indian. And this is the result of a deliberate effort in terms of the curriculum that you choose. But if you choose that the contents of your curriculum are simply designed to make people pass examinations so that they may get jobs and they earn money and then they live and die, then the nation always remains in its infancy. It never grows, it never has a culture. It doesn't have a defined character that describes what the nation is. And this is the fate of many African countries, that although we are artificial states created in Berlin, the effort to make us think as states is something that is work in progress. And until we are able to identify the critical issue which lies in the realm of education, our nations will always be teetering on the verge of collapse. It would be simplistic to simply say that civic education is the magic wand, that once you have civic education, then all will be well. No, that is not the case. The countries are very complex, and I'm reluctant to say, for example, that a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo finds herself in the space in which she is simply because there is no civic education. I know Congolese who are very aware of what ought to be done, but you are talking about a nation that was created in an environment that was designed to make it fail post-colonization. This is a country that, as you know, has nearly over 233 nations trying and struggling to be a state. This is a country that is designed to be in a constant state of conflict by different interests, particularly from the West, in order to mine and exploit our resources. So there are a combination of factors, and it's not always true that it is in societies where people have civic awareness that is the magic wand. And let us not confuse civic awareness and protest as the measure of civic awareness. We have seen protests which have led to the destruction of nations. We saw protests in Tunisia. Where did it lead Tunisia? We saw what happened in the Arab Spring. Where is Libya? Where is Egypt? We saw what happened in Sudan during those protests where you would say there was civic awareness. Where is Sudan? So it is not the case that the ability or the inclination to agitate in and of itself is a measure of a nation's sophistication. What you do with that information and that how information is used for the general good in a sustainable manner is in itself the measure of the value and quality of that awareness. Because if knowledge is used to destroy rather than to build, then one even begins to question whether it is knowledge that is valuable to the society at all. African governments have a duty to fulfill the aspirations of their people. We must, in the nature of things, go back to the basics and ask ourselves, when we were seeking to liberate ourselves from the chains of colonization, what are the promises that we made to ourselves? We made promises to the people that we would fight poverty. Are we, or those in government, those who have the honor and privilege of serving in different political positions, Are they using their political positions and the resources of the nation for purposes of fighting poverty? And how are they doing it? And are they doing it by creating environments that is going to enable the people to engage in research and development, to engage in agriculture, to engage in invention and innovation so that they may fight poverty, or they are using their position for purposes of personal benefit? It is often heard in many African countries, I hear people saying, politics is a game. Politics is not a game. Politics is the organization of the affairs of a people for the benefit of the people. So we must even begin to redefine our understanding of politics in order for us to use politics as an avenue of solving the problems. The other enemy that we identified was ignorance. And we said that we are going to fight ignorance, and that is where education comes in. Because history and evidence and experience has demonstrated that when a people are exposed through education in a proper manner, then they can become good citizens. They will be citizens who can call their leadership to account. They'll be citizens who will use their talents and intellect for the general good. And when that happens, then the society will become rich, and when the society becomes rich, the quality of people's lives will improve. And this is what we want when we are talking about the elimination of ignorance. And then, of course, all the other things like disease, when people are exposed, then the quality of their lives will be much better. And the environment in which they live will generally be an environment that enables them to realize their potential. Because when all is said and done, for what purpose are governments instituted amongst men? Governments are instituted amongst men for the purpose of coordinating the affairs and the resources of the state for the general good. And once that is achieved and people are then allowed to express themselves, then the critical mass of the people will be happy in the knowledge that they have individuals serving them, individuals who love and care for their generation and generations yet to be born. You know, if you look at almost every country in the world today, we have constitutions. And the whole idea of having a constitutional dispensation is that the constitution prescribes how you order government. It says it prescribes the do's and the don'ts. And it's not only the constitution, there are other laws which tells us what we should and should not do. And when you have created a culture where people pay and are punished for engaging in behavior that is unacceptable, then people will be accountable. But if you create an environment where the law is applied in a selective manner, where you have sacred cows who are above the law, where you have demigods who believe that their word is law, where you have individuals in political arena who believe that they are larger than life, almost as large as death, then you kill accountability. And therefore, what is important is that the citizens must make demands of political leadership. And they must make demands in a manner that is going to ensure that those in leadership perform according to the desires of the people. What has happened in Kenya in the recent past was an agitation by young people saying, for too long, you, the political class, have been doing what you want. For too long, you've thought that we are fools. For too long, you've treated us as if we are individuals who did not know what they want. And now we are saying that the positions you hold are held in trust for the general good. And if you don't exercise power in a manner that is for the benefit of the nation, then we shall call you out and we shall make demands of you. And that is what good citizens must do in an orderly, in a sustained manner, in a manner that sends a clear and unequivocal message to the political class that you are our servants, not our masters. Easier said than done, but history has demonstrated times without number that when you kill impunity, you introduce accountability, and when people become accountable, then they know their limits. And when they know their limits, then they know that they are only in service for a season, and during that season, they must deliver what they promised. And if they don't deliver, they will be asked to leave the stage. In fact, in a proper system, you don't need to go to the streets. In a proper system, people just follow the law. That is why you have different organs of the government. That is why you have courts. That is why you have accountability. And we see it in a number of countries. When people have been engaged in behavior which is unethical, then they resign. When they have engaged in behavior which is unacceptable, then they are punished in accordance with the law. It is only in extreme circumstances that the people go out to remind the leadership that things are not happening in the manner that they ought to. And this is a culture that develops over time. If you look at the history of other countries, even in different parts of the world, there were times when people had to go to the streets, and they still go to the streets. That does not mean that systems don't work. It is important that we make systems work. And it's by making these demands that systems begin to work and people begin to do things in a proper manner. It is happening. Even in these countries such as Kenya and quite a number of African countries, I know certain things work because people have made demands. And sometimes it is not as obvious as it should be, but without our knowledge, the knowledge of the critical mass of us, things do happen. That is why you find that the nation remains a going concern, even when you think that nothing is working. You still wake up and find water in your taps. You still wake up and find electricity, even when sometimes it is not there. You still wake up and you find roads have been tarmacked. You still wake up, you apply for your identity card and you get it. You still wake up and you find your airport is working. You still wake up and you find things are happening. And that is because there is some measure of accountability, not to the extent that we desire, but this is something that must be applied time and time again, because people can't forget, and because power sometimes corrupts, and sometimes absolute power corrupts absolutely, as the cliche goes.